Hello, I'm Mike Ryan, and welcome to BNAP Today, September 22, 2020. COVID-19 has smashed global tourism. In the US, states such as Florida and Texas saw huge spikes in COVID-19 cases as state governments work to reopen economies. Hawaii instead rolled out a policy that deliberately stopped tourism to ensure the health of its residents. State budgets across the county, including Hawaii's, have been devastated by the pandemic. Hawaii did avoid a coronavirus spike, but tourism really suffered. Keith Regan is Chief Administrative Officer of Hawaii Tourism Authority. Keith, aloha, I should say, because you're sitting in paradise, and welcome to our show.
Aloha, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Is it true that Hawaii has experienced low infection death rates compared to other parts of the country and the world during this pandemic? And what's the situation at the moment for the whole of Hawaii?
Yeah, the death rates for Hawaii has been extremely low. We have had, I think, over about 11,000 cases of COVID-19 here throughout the state. And I think the last count, I was just checking my numbers, but it looks like about 120 fatalities related to COVID. And many of those were individuals that had underlying conditions that, obviously made it a little bit more challenging to fight off that horrible disease. But obviously our hearts go out to the families of those people that lost their lives. But out of the 11,403 cases that we've had, about 120 individuals have passed away. But the overall rate of infection has been extremely low, and I think primarily it's due in part to the great work that our Department of Health and our governor's office and our mayors, have put forward to try to control the spread. Whether it's through various different lockdown orders or quarantine requirements for travel. But yeah, I think there's been a lot of activity going on to try to control it and keep COVID from spreading throughout the community.
Would you believe, though, 6 months ago, or maybe just a bit more over 6 months, the world was moving, was rocketing along, and then COVID happened, and it must really, you could really see the difference. If you're looking at areas around the world, I would think that around Waikiki, for example, that was always busy, always, it was like a ghost town.
It is, it's frightening, to see something like, and quite depressing actually, to see it unfold right before your eyes. Our economy here, our visitor industry was really just humming along back in January. We were anticipating having another, stellar year for the visitor industry in Hawaii. The year prior, we had something like 10.4 million visitors, and we were looking at ways on how we could maybe, not necessarily go for more visitors, but just try to get better. Visitors who were a little bit more mindful and perhaps not going for quantity but quality visitors at the start of the year. But then as COVID kicked off, March came around with the lockdown from the governor, for all trans-Pacific arrivals, where that really just, we went from 33,000 arrivals a day to something like under 4,000 total arrivals. It was quite surreal to see it unfold right before our eyes.
Restrictions on movements, travellers and non-essential business have been quite strict. Can you tell us more about the situation right now in terms of Hawaii-wide restrictions and traveller restrictions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so right now, all inter-island travel from Oahu to the neighbor islands requires travelers to quarantine for 14 days unless they have some sort of an exemption. And the only way that they can get an exemption is if they're within performing services for critical infrastructure. So government, those type of medical, healthcare type, critical infrastructure related, energy related type work would be able to get exemptions. But right now, just kind of internally within the state, anyone traveling from Honolulu to any of the neighbor island airports would be required to quarantine for 14 days. in a location that's been certified or allowable by the counties. So as an example, in the past, you would be able to stay at traditional lodging accommodations like hotels, resorts, those type, as well as Airbnb or VRBO type accommodations. But now those accommodations, Airbnb and VRBO accommodations, are not allowable in many of the counties because they want people to quarantine in, visitors to quarantine in actual hotels where it's a little bit more controllable. And that's really had a damper on resident travel between the islands because, for those of you that have been to Hawaii, you know that you can easily jump on a plane and within 30 minutes be literally at any airport within the state of Hawaii, at a different island to enjoy some of those wonderful experiences. But now that's all been kind of locked down to prevent the community spread of the disease. For trans-Pacific flights, anybody coming in from whether it's international or from our domestic routes, they are required to also quarantine for 14 days. And that requirement is to be also in traditional lodging as compared to previous lodging allowable allowances like Airbnb and VRBO. So,
Hawaii plans to open October 15, inverted commas there. So what will be the case then for travellers from outside of Hawaii and from, say, the mainland compared to other countries and nations?
Yeah. So, one of the things that we're looking at on October 15th is the pre-testing for those who want to travel to the state of Hawaii. Right now, it's only really been set up for domestic trans-Pacific arrivals. However, we're looking at expanding that to be able to allow for international arrivals to take advantage of the pre-testing requirement that the Department of Health has set up and required. The type of test that they're looking at is the nucleic acid amplification test, or the NAT test, that has to be certified by a specific lab and process. It's CLIA, it's Clinical Laboratory Improvement Amendments, which is run by the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the FDA. Basically, federal agencies are the ones that are putting the structure together as it relates to those tests. But people are going to be required 72 hours prior to arriving in Hawaii to take that NAT test, have a negative NAT test, and then that would have to be presented when they arrive here. And that information then would be recorded into what we call our Safe Travels program. And that Safe Travels program really is to collect data on those people arriving into the state of Hawaii, so that we can physically track on a daily basis, but just have a record of their arrival and then be able to communicate with them in the event that we need to reach them or interact with them during their stay.
We've talked about Oahu, or as they say in TV, Oahu, but it's Oahu. I learnt that. I was educated very quickly. Don't say Oahu. But and not with the accent either. It doesn't sound quite right, Oahu. But the other islands.
You sound great, Mike.
There you are. There's many years of living below Diamond Head. See what it's done for me? Nothing. But other islands. I mean, what about Maui? What about Kauai? The Big Island, Molokai? How are they handling COVID?
It's been tough. It's been very, very tough. Prior to COVID, and this is really telling. So statewide, our unemployment rate was 2.7%. 2.7%.
Wow.
And that was in August of 2019, so 1 year ago. In August 2020, it was 12.5%.
Oh.
And the neighbor islands are feeling it the most. Maui County as a whole, 20.7% unemployment.
Oh, that's terrible.
It is, absolutely. Maui Island is 21.4%. Molokai is 6.9%, and Lanai is 8.6%. Now, to give you some perspective, Molokai in August 2019 was 7.2% unemployment. So actually, their unemployment rate went down during COVID, which is interesting. I'm not sure why. But I can tell you, though, that Maui Island especially is really suffering from the lack of the visitor industry being open, because it's not only, people I think lose sight, it's not just about the hotel, right? It's not only, visitors staying in a hotel or an Airbnb. But it's also visitors going out into the community and spending money in the local economy, whether they're using, going on activities where, whale watches or snorkel cruises or, things like that, or renting bikes. But they're also going to restaurants. They're going to retail outlets. They're, experiencing some of the farmers markets, as an example, the lavender farm. So a lot of these places now are closed. In fact, I just saw in the news recently that the lavender farm on Maui, which is upcountry, if you've ever had a chance to go there, they just announced that they're closing permanently, and and it was due to the fact that COVID had really reduced the number of visitors and people that were able to go to their facilities. So that's not a unique story. That's something that I think a lot of restaurants, especially, and retail outlets are in, and those that are in that resort area are experiencing in particular.
So do you expect the businesses will be able to get back to where they started from, or do you think there'll be a lot of casualties along the way?
I don't think it's over yet in terms of businesses that are going to continue to make that tough decision. I think that's still, you might see it tapering off, but I don't think that once October 15th rolls around, all of a sudden you're going to see, kind of this line in the sand where, businesses have made the decision, now they're not going to close because tourism is reopened. I think, there's a break-even point that these businesses need to reach in order to keep their doors open. And I don't know that the 4,000 or 5,000 or 6,000 visitors a day into the state is going to be sufficient to ensure the survival of some of those businesses. There have been numerous federal programs that have been pushed forward to provide some financial support to those businesses to make sure that those employees, could be kept on the payroll for a certain period of time. But all of those are starting to run out. And definitely going to be there's still a rocky road, a bumpy road ahead of us. We're not quite yet on that smooth paved road.
What longer term changes are expected for tourism and the hospitality sector?
Our branding and marketing strategy really is going to be focused on the mindful visitor, and by that I mean, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with this term, but malama. If you've heard of the term malama, it means to care for, right? And that's a very powerful Hawaiian term, and it is literally the my boss likes to say it's the sister to aloha, in the sense that it is so important to who we are as a community. And what you're going to see going forward is really this push about creating a malama mindset, a mindset where our visitors are coming in thinking about how are they going to care for not only themselves and their immediate family that might be joining them on the trip, or their friends, but also how are they going to care for the people of this community? How are they going to interact with the people of this community? How are they going to take precautions to protect the people of this community? And that's that whole malama mindset that you'll see as we start to roll out our branding. We've already developed a significant amount of resources that will be utilized, to push that forward. But that is really going to be the goal, because, at 10.4 million visitors, where we were prior to COVID, there was a lot of pushback and a lot of the resident sentiment toward tourism was really starting to trend negative, because there were just so many visitors here, overwhelming the beach parks, overwhelming the hiking trails, overwhelming restaurants, and some of the places where the quote-unquote locals would go, where you wouldn't normally see visitors. But with social media and everything else, those sort of resident locations, have become, or had become, what we'll call hotspots, where there were a lot more visitors coming in, and it made it difficult for residents to be able to enjoy some of those locations. And so I think what you're going to see is going forward is this kind of looking for the mindful visitor, looking for the visitor who really understands that there has to be a positive relationship between the visitor and the resident in order for in order for tourism to be sustainable going forward. And that's really been our goal and will be our goal and our focus as we roll out our branding campaigns.
I have to say I'm very biased towards Hawaii. It's probably my favourite place on the planet, and I drive everybody nuts because I play all the old Hawaiian music at night here, and it's an amazing place. Keith, Regan, thank you very much for your time, and we must do this, if you don't mind, more often.
Absolutely, Mike. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and your audience. Mahalo.
The economic slowdown caused by the coronavirus pandemic is stifling a federal program meant to spur new investment in low-income neighbourhoods. That's according to a recent survey from an advocacy group that backs the initiative. The Economic Innovation Group surveyed more than 100 investors and other people involved in opportunity zones, designated areas that offer tax incentives for investment. Created by the 2017 Tax Cut Law, the zones are aimed at attracting money and new businesses to poor communities. But the pandemic is putting some of that investment activity on hold, according to the survey of investors, Opportunity Zone fund managers and other people associated with the zones. Blake Christian is a partner with Holthouse, Carlin and Van Trite. Blake, first of all, welcome, and what are your thoughts?
Great to see you as always, Mike. Coincidentally, I was one of those 100 people surveyed, so I had a small part in those results. Just to put this in perspective, there's been $75 billion put in as equity into these opportunity zone funds. And what a lot of people don't realize is that is just a portion of what will ultimately be invested. Most people will add a debt element to their capital stack, certainly on real estate projects and operating businesses that also take advantage of the Opportunity Zone program. So if you just used a 4 times debt to equity ratio, you'd end up with about $375 billion, which is, and by my calculations, I think there's probably about $500 billion committed, $500 billion committed at this point in time. So, and again, to keep it in perspective, the final regulations didn't get inked for 2 years after passage of the act. And so naturally, and so that was late December 2019. So we're only, several months beyond that. And so it's natural that the money sitting in these funds and these articles and these analyses are that the money hasn't dropped into all of it hasn't dropped into physical projects, either real estate deals or operating businesses. But again, that's the way business works. And when there's uncertainty, it causes people to freeze and not move forward. And that's what we're seeing. the money is starting to move. Absolutely, I have been nonstop busy with Opportunity Zone projects all year, and so I'm much more optimistic than some of the articles. Forbes came out with an article similar to the EIG report.
We know that opportunity zones have attracted great interest from real estate developers and investors, but what opportunities are available to other types of businesses or entrepreneurs?
Well, again, any operating business, that's the beauty of the program, is it is extremely flexible. So you can start a software company in an opportunity zone, you can expand a business, you can even move your existing business into an opportunity zone and obtain these long-term benefits. In 10 years, you can sell your business if you structure it correctly and have no federal, and in all but 4 state cases, you can exempt your state gain from taxation also.
For holders of investments where, say, partnerships have broken down or you may just want to walk away, can opportunity zones offer greater flexibility in this circumstance?
Yeah, absolutely, and people, word has gotten out there about the power of this program, and so a lot of people, and there's a lot of capital gains. A lot of people changed up their portfolio mix when we had when the pandemic first hit, and we had the huge drop in the stock market. A lot of people cut down their equity balance and took gains that they had from multiple years of appreciation, and so there's some very large gains that need to be sheltered, and this program is perfect for that. And also it's fine for the patient investor because you have a fairly long glide path to reinvesting those proceeds. Because of COVID, Treasury issued IRS notice 2020-39, which allows you up to 55 months to deploy the cash that you put into an opportunity zone fund. So again, there's not a huge rush to to start digging your foundation for your real estate project. And that's what we're seeing. It'll take a little time for the program to get traction, but the money's sitting there ready to go.
Can an operating business start, purchase or move their business into an opportunity zone? And what are the potential benefits?
Yeah, so so let's just say a business that's been operating for a few years is outside the zone, but the owner has a capital gain to roll into the business. They can physically move that business either into a rented facility, or they can buy the property, and then by as long as they invest 233% more than the tax basis in the property that they moved into that zone, then they can generally meet all the tests for qualification, and then after waiting 10 years, they can sell that business, and any appreciation above what they invested into the business is going to be tax-free.
I think the opportunity zones are just fabulous for disadvantaged areas, but are you aware of any opportunity zones that are not in disadvantaged areas, and what sort of problems do you think would emerge?
Yeah, that is one of the criticisms of the program, and what they did is they left they laid out criteria for what census tracts, and census tracts are usually about 10,000 people population, and so they're very irregular. They're not a square. They're very gerrymandered how they're laid out, but what they did is they left it to the governors, and they said, they would usually give them about 4 times the amount of census tracts to pick from, but they had to narrow that down to one quarter of that number. And so they took, they with some input from the mayors and other, elected officials and economic development people, they picked the census tracts that they felt were going to be the most impactful. There was also some fine print in the code that allowed those governors to pick an adjacent census tract to an economically challenged census tract, and for some synergy. So that's where the criticism comes in, is that some wealthier neighborhoods were pulled in to get some synergies to redevelop a broader area. I don't think they'll make that mistake again. There was logic for doing it, but that's where the criticism comes from.
November 3 is looming. It's probably more fun than Disneyland at this stage, except we have to wear masks. Have both presidential candidates, Biden and Trump, indicated greater support for or changes to the program if they won the election? And before we get onto that, I was just reading about that if there is no result by January, we could have President Pelosi. Interesting.
Yeah, that's that should encourage people to vote, right? Well, let me remind your listeners, viewers, that President Obama actually developed this program under his administration. It just so happened to pass with a lot of support from Trump and the Republicans. But it's a very bipartisan bill, and again, a very, very powerful economic development tool. And so both Biden, who was part of the Obama administration, obviously, as well as Trump, are big advocates of the program. Vice President Biden has come out and on the record and has said that he would make some minor tweaks to it. He wants a little more transparency. He wants Treasury to do some studies to make sure that the residents in those neighborhoods are being positively impacted like the program wants. And so he's fully supportive of it. The only negative is that he has talked about increasing capital gain rates for taxpayers making more than $1 million. And so the program defers the tax on the gain that you reinvest into the program, and that will be reportable in 2026. And so some clients are concerned that they may be deferring taxes at a 23.8% rate and end up having to pay a higher rate. I think there's a good chance that will get grandfathered and we won't have that bump in rates. I don't think Joe Biden really wants to punish people that have already put money into this program. And it won't be the rich people that'll be complaining about it. It'll be the governors, mayors, and city council members who are going to see money pulled out of the projects that are on the drawing board. So I do not see, I think it's going to be a wash which president gets in on the program. I think it'll survive just fine.
Interesting times ahead. You might say it's quite taxing, which is right up your alley. So pleasure always chatting. And we'll do this again next week. Blake Christian from Holthouse, Carlin and Van Trite, which is hcvt.com. How's that, Blake? Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Well, that's it for BNAP today, September the 22nd, 2020. I'm Mike Ryan.